Let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that some have entertained angels without knowing it.
Good evening. Good evening. Wow. Too many pancakes. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you. It's good to be back at First Lutheran, good to be with you, and I bring you greetings with me from the 100,000 of your sisters and brothers in Christ who with you make up the Nebraska Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. It is good to be with you tonight, but I want you to know why I'm with you tonight. I'm here because people are talking. And I thought you should know. I want to talk first about what Evelyn just read, that first two verses from the 13th chapter of Hebrews. It went by pretty quickly. You may or may not have caught it. Let mutual love continue is the letter to the early Christians. Let mutual love continue. Be in love with one another. Get along inside the house of God, the letter says. It says it to us still. There's no way to witness to the world beyond without getting along inside. That's what Holy Communion's about, coming to the table together. We're not supposed to fight at the table, right? So the instruction is, let mutual love continue. Get along so that other people can see it, and in this broken world especially might be drawn to where people get along in spite of their individual differences with one another. In fact, that mutual love is a beautiful word. It's the Greek word Philadelphia. Now, who knows what we call the city of Philadelphia? Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love. Of course you know that. Well, brotherly love for the human family. Let brotherly love continue. Let mutual love continue. Then it shifts to the second verse, and the English we've got says, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, which is a really complicated word, really complicated sentence for about 3 words. Where it was Philadelphia, love for the brothers, love for each other in the first verse, this one is Philoxenos. Yeah, there is no Philoxenos, Pennsylvania. There's no Philoxenos anywhere. You probably never heard of the word Philoxenos. Why would you? What you need to know is it translates literally as love the stranger, love the foreigner, love the outsider. Do you see the parallel? Love those inside the church, love those outside the church. Now, I know you've been hearing throughout Lent on Wednesday evenings what it is to welcome others. You heard about Abraham and Sarai being called from their homeland. You heard about Jesus separating the sheep and goats based on how they treated other people. You heard about how God's people were called in their wilderness journeys to treat others well. A lot of shoulds and musts and ought tos in God telling us to show love for others, to welcome others. That's fine. We are supposed to. But Hebrews makes this whole inviting or welcoming strangers and foreigners something different. He says, don't neglect to show hospitality to strangers, to welcome strangers, because by doing that, some have entertained angels unawares. He tells the story of Abraham and Sarah, who welcomed 3 foreigners into their camp and fed them, and then realized that they weren't just foreigners, they weren't just men, they were angels, and they left a blessing. In Hebrews, the instruction to love one another inside and welcome those outside isn't just because you must or because you ought, but because good things happen when you do that. And I want you to know that's what people are talking about. And I thought you might want to know that. I just came back from the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America main office in Chicago, where the ELCA Church Council met this last week, and people were talking, and they were talking about you. Ran into a young woman who has served a term as a young adult in Global Mission, and then she spent some time working at a church office there, introduced myself as Bishop of the Nebraska Synod. She said, oh yeah, I know about Nebraska. You know what they say? I said, no, what do they say? She said, they say Nebraska is the most generous synod in the ELCA. I said, I didn't know that. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I don't know if you knew that, but I thought you should. People are talking. I thought you'd want to know. Nebraska Synod, the most generous synod in the ELCA. Then, when the floods came, a couple of weeks before that, a guy called up from Reuters, the British news service. And I'm from Nebraska, so I don't really have much of an accent. It's just kind of a flat talking, right? But this guy said, "Well, thank you, Bishop Maas, for taking my call." And he asked me a number of questions about Lutheran disaster response and how that works here. And then he said, and I can't keep doing his British accent because I'll mangle it. He said, "I didn't know anything about Lutherans, but I moved last year to Albuquerque, and I found out how well you Lutherans take care of refugees and migrants who don't have homes. And now I find out about how well you take care of people who are flooded out of their homes. That's all I know about Lutherans, but I'm impressed. People are talking. I thought you'd want to know." And a couple of years before that, when my wife was going through her graduate program, she was going through full-time, so she had to take extra courses in the summer. We ended up driving to Denver a couple of weeks every summer for her to take classes. I ended up at one of her courses out there, and it's a gathering of, frankly, odd people, because she's a counselor, and, counselors are odd people. At least I think so. She thinks pastors are odd people, so it's fair. Now, when I go places, especially airplanes or among groups of people I hardly know, especially if I'm not wearing an identifying outfit, I don't always tell people what I do for a living, because sometimes it leads to really interesting conversations, strange conversations. So when I was with her at a coffee break and her classmates were all around her and someone sidled up to me and said, "So what do you do for a living?" I said, "Oh, I'm a Lutheran bishop." She said, "Excuse me?" I said, I'm a Lutheran bishop." She said, "Oh, I know about Lutherans." She said, "I grew up in Egypt. We moved here just before I became a teenager. I grew up in Egypt where being a Christian was a choice. And I have friends whose family members were murdered because they were Christians." She said, "Then we moved here and I saw what passes for Christianity in the United States and what people fight over and call it faith in the United States. And I knew I could never belong to a church again." I thought, wow. But she wasn't done. She said, "Then a couple of years ago, my youngest sister got pregnant, and her boyfriend left her, and she became a single parent. And she didn't want to raise her child alone. And so she went to the church in our neighborhood, same denomination we went to in Egypt, and she said, 'I want to have my child baptized.' And they said, 'We can't. That would be condoning your sin. We won't do that.' And the woman there over coffee told me how her sister went to 3 different churches in the city where she lived and got the same answer every time. But she said, then, my sister found a Lutheran church. I don't know why, but she found a Lutheran church, and she went there and said, I have this daughter, I'm raising her myself, and I want to have her baptized. And the pastor said, sure, sounds great. We don't really care who you are or what you've done. We care about who you're becoming and who your daughter will be in Christ. Welcome. And so this woman said, I still don't have a lot to do with the church in the United States, but when I go, it's a Lutheran church. Because I think they understand. People are talking. I thought you should know. Again and again and again and again, when I talk to people around the state and around the country, and they find out that I'm a Lutheran Christian, they don't talk about Martin Luther, and they don't talk about our theology, and they don't talk about Luther's love of beer, and all the other things that we on the inside of the church talk about. They talk about how Lutheran Christians seem to be those whose doors are open, whose hearts are open, whose hands are open. When the stranger shows up with nowhere to call home, when the disaster strikes and all is lost, when people are different and no one wants to welcome them in, when bellies are empty and hunger is real, Lutherans are the ones who step up and feed them. People are talking. People are talking about not only mutual love, but love to the stranger. And they're not just talking about anybody, and they're not just talking about Lutherans, they're talking about you. And I thought you'd want to know, because it makes a difference. And they're not talking about you because they think being welcoming and overcoming differences and being generous and working hard for the sake of others without caring who gets the credit, they're not talking about you because any of that's easy. They're talking about it because it's inspiring and because it's our witness, and it's because how they come to know Jesus Christ and the good news of the gospel. People are talking. I thought you'd want to know. People are talking about you and your love for one another and your love for the stranger. I thought you'd want to know. Thank you.